So, Berto, instead of us playing Age of Empires all night long, I thought we would read some Patron emails and respond. What do you say, Berto?
Considering we lost the last game we played, then I think this is a great idea.
All right. Well, this is the Psychology in Seattle podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda, licensed therapist and professor, and I usually play the British on Age of Empires. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda. I usually play the Mongols in Age of Empires, but I'm in real life. I, of course, have a job, just like most people. I train lids to get on jars.
Anonymous listener says, is it healthy for toddlers to have unrestricted access to their iPads? My sister-in-law has 2-year-old twins that have had unrestricted access to iPads since they were 14 months old, and I have never seen them without it in their hands since. I'm curious what research says about this, as they hardly look up from their screens and have not formed attachments to anyone else in the family besides their mom and dad. They become distressed if someone tries to get their attention away from the iPad, and it is their constant companion during meal times, family time, and basically every minute that they're not in their beds. I'm in no way trying to mom shame, because I know being a sole caretaker of 2 babies is probably really stressful, and the iPads give my sister-in-law room to breathe. I just find myself wondering how this might affect their attachments later in life, or how they will learn to handle life without constant stimulation, and am wondering what your take is. Berto, what do you think?
Oh my gosh.
Do your kids have iPads constantly in their hands?
Well, no. So with my first child, we did much better with this because we had undivided abilities to monitor things. So for example, with my first child, she didn't watch any TV for the first 9 months, maybe to a year, almost a year. And then the first thing that she was watching is I would put on old black and white Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood reruns and Blue's Clues and the Nutcracker Suite.
How many hours a day would she watch a screen?
Oh, no. Back then it was like, 30 minutes.
A day?
At most, yeah. But then, as the years went by, of course, she started watching more and stuff like that. With my second child, unfortunately, I can tell the difference because you're just like juggling. As soon as you start having to try to juggle, you need some outlet. And so,
another factor is the older kid is watching screens because your older daughter is like, what, 5-6 years older than her?
Yeah, 5 years. So now my second kid, now it's not as bad as what it was just being described. We definitely set limits and all that stuff. But I can tell, man, there is definitely more attachment there to those devices. With my first child, she is very well self-regulated when it comes to this stuff. She will turn off the TV after a couple of shows. She will, with my current child, if left unfettered, she would watch all day long. She would stay glued to the screen 1 centimeter away. And so I'm always having to be like a hawk, like, you're too close. No, we said only 2, like all these kinds of things. And I can tell it's way worse. So I can't imagine. And there is more of that, like, but I wanted to, but I was, like all these things. It's so hard not to mess up your kids, though. Like with my first child, so I just mentioned, we have not these problems with attachments to screens as much. But I think because there's not enough suffering in her life, she's now getting pretty demanding about things, and she expects, things always go her way, and when things don't, she gets so who knows, right? But what I do know is I do think from my own observations that too much screen time does affect kids in not such a great way.
How so?
They seem more preoccupied with the screen than with the people. They pay less attention. Their focus is easy when it's in front of the screen, not so easy when it's not in front of the screen.
What do you mean?
Being able to focus on something. They have shorter attention span, potentially. Oh. They get more irritated when they're not watching, things like that. That's just my anecdotal observation from a sample size of 2, but where we did 2 different things.
How much screen time do they have now?
So during
per day.
Yeah, during the school days, obviously it's not as much. Sometimes in the mornings they can't watch at all, and sometimes they'll watch like especially the little one. The older one actually almost doesn't, but maybe she'll watch like a 20-minute thing.
Do they have
in
iPads?
the evenings? We have the family as a family. We have an iPad. Yeah.
Okay.
But
they
they're
don't
not
have like a personal iPad.
They do have the little one has an iPod. A little iPod.
Like a screen. Essentially, it's an iPhone that doesn't have a cell connection.
Which she got for her 6th birthday.
So she has a mini iPad.
She has a mini iPad, but and we are already limiting it because she just got it for her birthday, and basically, actually she got it not for her birthday. She got it because she was supposed to get a hand-me-down, but that one is broken. So whatever. The point is, we already having to set limits because immediately it was like, okay, this is crack cooking.
So how much screen time does she have on like a Saturday?
On a Saturday, we'll do, in the morning they might watch like an hour of shows, maybe longer. It's funny
on the TV. On the TV,
yeah.
So it'd be like an old movie or a cartoon.
Cartoons. Now, as horrifying as it sounds to me now that I talk about it, sometimes they'll watch 2 hours. What's crazy is that's nothing. That's peanuts compared to the amount of time I spent in front of a TV when I was a kid.
Yeah, I think there has to be a distinction between what they're doing, and I'll get into that too. Because when we were growing up, there were TVs, there's reruns and whatnot, and kids would wake up in the morning and watch TV all day long. So it wasn't. And if you're on an iPad as a kid, but you only have access to like educational games, then that's a little different, right?
Right.
Whereas if you're 13 and you have full access to the internet and you're looking at pornography and Reddit and 4chan, and it's a different experience, right?
Very different.
So the whole idea of screens is, like saying friends are they good or bad? It's like, well, some friends are good, some friends are bad.
Some friends are bad.
Yeah. So what I'll say is that, it's way. The first thing I'll say about screens and kids is it's way more complicated than it's typically talked about. Like I was saying, what's happening, but it's really, and plus it's really easy to say, and I was looking up common articles and discourse on the internet that, screens are bad. Okay. It just is that kind of culture because you're not going to find a lot of people defending screens for kids, right? No one, unless you're big TV or you're big Apple or something, like you're not advocating for kids being on screens. There's no, so there's only an unchecked, negativity around screens, but which I'll get into that it can be negative, as you were saying, Brito. But so I'll just say from the get-go that we have to push back from the table of our culture to think straight because there's so much negativity around screens, and and parents are, because even as you were talking, there's a level of apologeticness about it, right, and a level of shame about like. Well,
and some of that is because I actually shame the generation before me, my dad, and I understand. So like he's in New York, he's going through his post-grad at Columbia, and he's the only parent with a 5-year-old. So what the hell is he supposed to do? But I don't love that I was allowed to just watch, 8 hours of TV on a given Saturday or something. Like, I don't love that. Yeah. So I do parent shame my dad. And
well, I think the shame, maybe not on your dad, but on the culture of Bogota, which is...
This was New York, but sure, same in Bogota.
New York maybe as well, is isolation of kids. I mean, I grew up in the same house throughout my entire life, and so did all my neighbors. And so I had... right next door were 2 brothers. One was a year older, one was a year younger than me. And the other house on the other side of my house was a kid. And the 4 of us were all, the same age generally, and we were best friends. And so all the time, 24/7 pretty much, I was with these guys. And we would occasionally watch TV, but we had so much more to do. There was adventures. We would, it was the 70s. No one gave a crap about kids. And so we just did whatever we wanted to, and we did all sorts of stuff. And, I certainly watched a lot of TV, but I had something else to do. My impression of you was there's nothing else to do.
Nothing. I was an only child in New York City, in Queens, at 5 years old, with no neighbor, friend, kids, or anything. Zero. I mean, the closest friend I had lived 3 blocks away. And so it always had to be arranged, like for us to play and stuff like that.
And I feel like a lot of families are like that today. I feel like an increasing number of families with helicopter parents who are terrified of letting their kids play with the neighbors for fear of this boogeyman that, the internet will tell you is right around the corner, that we have parents, edging on the, erring on the side of caution, and you're not going to be abducted if the kid is in their bedroom on their iPad. It's just, there's no worry about that.
Even though they are abducted into the internet.
Right. So we just have to...
Now, that said, though, I do want to say, like, why do I even have an iPad in the house? No, actually, because there are a lot of positives, and I think we'll get into a lot of that. But like my 11-year-old loves drawing on the thing and uses it for a lot of, like, watches educational YouTube videos on how to draw, all these things. We have installed tons of like educational software and things. So there are positives, but
yeah, absolutely. So the American Academy of Pediatrics makes some recommendations. They say on their website that there should be no screen time at all for children until 18 or 24 months. Did you follow that recommendation with your kids?
Again, with our first kid, pretty much, maybe not quite exactly, but
I mean, they're essentially saying no TV until 2 years old.
So so we didn't do that, but we came close in that, even though we started introducing TV at a distance, and I thought that was important because, like, the proximity in my mind does matter, but also the content. It was Mr. Rogers, like calming, like, it wasn't. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's another difference for our generation. I don't know about you in New York, but for me growing up, it was Mighty Mouse and Bugs Bunny, although Bugs Bunny has some problems, but it was a lot of Mr. Rogers.
We watched all that.
And I loved Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street.
I did too. I loved those shows.
And those are not only harmless, but beneficial in a lot of, I mean, I wonder sometimes about my sense of morality having been given to me in part by Mr. Rogers himself.
I don't doubt it. And I also feel like Mr. Rogers was a calming force for me, because in a world where I was in the middle of such maelstrom, with my parents divorcing and all that, and yet here was this person that would just talk to me calmly, explain things to me, and it was nice,
Their recommendations for 2 to 5 years old is 1 hour or less per day, Berto. Did you follow that?
Yeah, pretty close. Weekends, though, not so much. But still, I'm still batting better than my previous generation.
Well, what I'll say is that the American Academy of Pediatrics, I think what they're doing is they're like, well, people are going to ask us for a recommendation, so we might as well just err on the side of caution and shoot really low.
Sure.
You ask the American Medical Association, how many cigarettes should I smoke? They're probably going to err on the side of, well, none. None. But if you read the science, it's like, well, if you smoke 1 cigarette every few days, the risk is X. So it's simplistic to say that, especially in our sort of binary thinking, that if your 5-year-old is watching 2 hours and you're double the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendation, then you're somehow making a mistake. And it's too simplistic. We have to ask all those specific questions that we were talking about earlier. What are they doing on the screens? Right. Are they doing it with others? Berto, with your kids, do they interact with others as they're doing things on their screens, or do they allow you to, join them, so to speak?
Yeah, my little one actually likes for me or Mama to watch. Oftentimes it's the two of them watching a show. The shows we let them watch, although there's so much content nowadays, but the shows we let them watch are certainly, there's nothing age inappropriate, you know. Some of them are a little schizophrenic for my taste, like, meaning, I probably shouldn't use that word, but some of them are very visually overstimulating, like lots of flashing, changing things. But a lot of them are just good storytelling, which I actually get into myself. So, like one of my kids' favorite shows is Gravity Falls, which is one of my favorite shows. It's a Disney produced 4-season cartoon that is very entertaining both for kids and adults. So, yeah.
Yeah. So another thing, so interacting, so if your kids are on screens a lot, and that's just the way that it is, one thing you can do to mitigate the potential risk and to really have fun with your kids is to join them, you know, to don't, not just, it's like, well, they're on a screen, so they're entertained, because, you know, you can dip in and out of their experience. The other thing is it helps you monitor, you know.
Yeah.
And like you said, baseline, the kids probably want you to be involved. They probably want you to at least watch them. You know, if they're playing a game, they would probably love it if you just watched them and commented, you know, like, oh, you just
totally
angry birded that pig, like, good for you. And you know, the enjoyment for them just skyrockets, right?
Totally. So by the way, it's also easy to misunderstand what development stage they're at, especially with your first one, but I've done it even with the second. I love Miyazaki movies, as you know, and we had watched, you know, a couple of cute ones like My Neighbor Totoro and stuff. Okay, so first off,
what did you call him?
My Neighbor Totoro.
No, what movies?
Totoro. Miyazaki.
Yeah, Miyazaki. Yeah, I thought you said Asaki. I'm like, Asaki.
And so okay, and at one point when my little one was much littler, I think she was 3 or no, like maybe 2, we watched Spirited Away.
That one's a little older.
It is, and she was so scared about the piggies scene where the parents turn into piggies.
Yeah.
So what would happen is,
I mean,
we would be eating
did a
dinner.
Number on me at the age of 35 when I saw it for the first time.
So we'd be eating dinner, like maybe we'd go out to a restaurant, we're eating, and she'd be like, "Don't stop eating." I'm like, "What? Are you gonna turn into a piggy?" Yeah. I was like, "Oh no." Okay, and then even worse, years later, I tried to show them Princess Mononoke.
Oh no!
And then at the start,
I mean,
I
so
forgot.
are you falling for the American falsehood that cartoons are for kids always?
Well, I mean,
because Princess Mononoke is, there are guns and killing and
there are, but at the same time, it's a really
a cut off head that runs around eating things. Like, it's awful.
So that's what happened at the beginning is when the hero shoots an arrow and it takes off the other rider's head. I didn't remember that at all, and so all of a sudden they're both like, "Ah!" and we had to stop the movie. And I was like, "Okay, I've traumatized them." Yeah, that's
really violent. I mean, and disturbing. Like that when the worms infest his arm, it's really gross.
Yeah, but dude, no, I hear you, and in retrospect, I get it. First of all, I had a rose-colored tint picture in my head of what the movie was like. Number one, number two. I watched Terminator when I was like 10 years old, right? I watched Raiders of the Lost Ark when I was 6.
But your kids are, okay, well, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I
wonder Raiders. Let me think Raiders.
Raiders has, you know, like faces melting and shooting and
I wonder, though. I wonder if Raider, because on average, I would take a guess and say that Princess Mononoke is more traumatizing to children than Raiders would be, like by a lot, Maybe. I would say. Anyway, so yeah. The other question you want to ask is, how are the kids feeling while they're using the screens? Because if they're watching Mr. Rogers, they're probably not stressed out, you know? Whereas if they've downloaded a game for kids, but the game is creating a compulsion, like I must get to the next level, you know, because games are really manipulative like that, then that's a different experience. It's
Right.
but we call it all screen time, which is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So it's a completely different thing. The other thing to think about is how are the kids adjusting overall? Because if I heard, well, because what anonymous listener is saying is my sister-in-law, as a single mother, the babies are on their iPads constantly. And of course, the knee-jerk reaction is there's something wrong with that. They're not interacting with other people. They're shutting other people out. That's abnormal to be walking around all day long with your iPad in your hand. But what I would want to know is, which of course is what the parents and what as a sister-in-law you want to know is, well, how are the kids going to do? That's always, we sometimes lose sight of that. It's like when you're in the middle of a countryside at noon and you come to a stop sign or a stoplight and you can see for miles left and right and you don't run the stoplight.
Right.
That's stupid. Like the reason for a stoplight is for safety. If you can tell that you can run the light without causing any problems, then you're just wasting your time. Now, I'm not saying you're an idiot if you don't, but I'm saying that we end up fetishizing the rules instead of the reason for the rules. The reason for a stoplight is for safety. The reason why we're concerned about screen time is because of development and happiness and mental health.
Right. Like if you see an open till with some money and no one's watching, like why not take the money? It's like dumb. You'd be stupid not to.
Yeah. So the issue is development. So if a child at the age of 5 is on a screen, say twice as much as the average kid, but they are hitting all their marks in terms of developments, in terms of mental health and attachment and emotional regulation and skills, speech, getting along with others, flexibility, focus. If they're able to do all the things that you would hope a kid be able to do, then I would be less concerned, because what's the problem? Why are we focusing on screen time? The converse we could imagine being true as well, where you have a kid who isn't doing any of the things that would upset someone in a grocery store, right? Like the kid is well behaved, the kid isn't on their iPad, the kid likes to do their homework, but they're crumbling on the inside and they're depressed and anxious and feel alone. That's a problem, right? So we have to look at outcomes. We have to look at the overall goal. With the roads, we're concerned about safety and, saving people's lives. With parenting, we want to raise happy, well-adjusted children. And so, let's look at that Okay, let's look at the research. So, because there's, we've had enough time and certainly enough concern in our society within my field to research this. And so typically the way we research this topic is we survey families. We just ask, someone would call you up, Berto, and say like, okay, on average, how often does your kid watch screens? And then you also ask, how well adjusted do you think your kid is? That kind of stuff. Or how is your kid doing in school? Has your kid been sent home? Does your kid have angry outbursts?
What if you're on the call and they're asking you the question, you're like, I can't talk very loud because Billy might hear me and then things will go really poorly for us.
Yeah. So these are not great, research designs, but they're cheap and available. And what they find a lot of time is that screen time is associated with a whole bevy of bad things. So when you put it on a graph and you have increased screen time, it will often be positively associated with emotional dysregulation, problems in school, focus problems, behavioral problems, depression, early mental health problems. It's all associated. But we can't tell from survey data and designs that it causes it, right? Because you can imagine a kid who's more depressed or is doing worse in school might isolate and might turn to screens to pass the time. So we can't determine anything from those data other than an hypothesis. But there are some studies that actually try to look at causation. So This one study looked at kids that were between 2 and 3 years of age, and what they found was that more screen time was associated with poorer performance on tests for behavioral, cognitive, and social development, and that covers a lot of ground there. Also, poor development did not seem to lead to more screen time. So the point is that it suggests a causation. The only way we would be able to know causation is if we took 1,000 children and we put 500 in a bubble that had screens, another 500 in a bubble that did not have screens, and then we raised them in that world and then measured them at the age of 35 and tried to make some differences between those two groups. And we're not going to be able to do that ever. So we have to try to take some guesses. And what it seems as though from some studies that when they control for things like developmental, over time, essentially what you do is you take a kid at like 2 or 3 who maybe hasn't had enough time to look at screens, and you measure their development. And for those kids who were already developing slow to begin with, and they and then you can control for that variable by looking at kids longitudinally. Does that make sense to you, Berto?
It does make sense.
Yeah.
One thing that is puzzling to me is imagine you're growing up on a farm and you don't have any screens. And I don't mean a farm today, like let's rewind the clock, whatever. And you're getting exposed to a lot of things in nature, how the pig behaves, how the cow behaves, all these things. But just like your little ecosystem. When you're watching TV, especially nowadays, you are seeing concepts of such a range, like space, other places in the world, different perspectives, broad range of races and ideologies and things. And
Mr. Rogers teaching you about feelings and about fairness, and about
and so you're seeing all this
how mail is delivered. That kind of
That's right. And so I kind of wonder, because I've also seen some information about the average IQ rate has been rising over time, and so I'm wondering though, wouldn't this have an impact on the developing mind because you're being exposed to so many more concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Flynn effect, the seeming increase of IQ generation is hard to know if it's actually happening or it's just an artifact of our measurement methods. But it does stand to reason that we as children, just take our generation, were exposed to so much more possible things to learn, that were abstract. Like you're saying, if you grow up on a farm, there are non-abstract things to learn about, like pigs, and so you're learning things. But the things we were exposed to, like I literally watched Carl Sagan at the age of 6,
right,
and
talking about the universe,
right. And Mr. Rogers talks about emotions and about fairness, these complex ideas, and the idea goes is that, and then also we had much more visual stimulation with TV and early video games that stimulate the brain. And when you stimulate the brain, it makes connections. It bolsters the brain that makes
clearly not enough.
Yeah. Well, the Flynn effect has passed me by very quickly. I'm an old dumb person now, but anyway. So my speculation is that it makes total sense, and you have to look at kids overall. But if a kid is on screens a lot, what this probably means is that something is wrong in the family. The parent is depressed, they're overworked, they don't have enough help, they have a substance abuse problem. Something is wrong. Because for you, Berto,
right,
you don't have any of those problems, you and your wife. And so, you definitely stress and maybe a little overworked, but you do have enough power and space and emotional, wherewithal to be able to have the luxury, if you will, to think about your kids' well-being. And it takes effort to get the kids off the screen sometimes. It takes effort to entertain them, to give them something else to do. It takes effort to connect them with the neighbor's kids so you can have them play. That's all effort that if you were depressed, you wouldn't have, and the screens would be a convenient distraction for you as a parent.
And to your point too about what comes first, what's the causation? Because like you could say, all right, well, so I've had a lot of emotional, psychological problems in my life. And if I said, I bet you'll, in fact, I've often said, you know what? I think a lot of TV was one of the things that messed me up when I was a kid. But at the same time, why was I watching so much TV?
Right.
To what we're saying. It's like, well, okay, because I had no friends in the apartment building, in the neighborhood.
You're literally being abused by the babysitter.
I was being abused. I was neglected in the sense like, anyways, like that's the point. I was lonely. I was a lonely child, right? That's why my favorite song is Lonely Boy, right? So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the TV help or hurt, or is it neutral?
Right, and I think it's a cascade. So it begins with a much more fundamental problem in the parents and the neglect and the stress. Right. And then the screens come along, and depending on what the kids are doing on it, it can compound the problem because say, your dad did want to interact with you one day while you're glued to the television, it might have interfered. It creates this vicious cycle where the more neglect you commit to a child, the more dependent they become on the screen, which makes it harder when you do have time to hang out with the kid, that the kid actually will shut you out, Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of presentations, there's a lot of variability there, but I think generally speaking, for you parents out there, well, let me give you my overall take on screens. Because I feel like a lot of parents will really focus on like, well, how much time? Okay, what you need to be focusing on, and parents out there, including you, Berto, what you should be focusing on. You should be focusing on secure attachments with your children.
Right.
You should be focusing
Meaning like make sure that the screens are properly secured so they don't fall on their heads.
Exactly. You need to be focusing on making sure your child has the least amount of stress as possible. Mm-hmm. You want to be focusing on quality time, even if it's, say, half an hour, but it's, it's good quality time with your kid.
Yeah.
You want to be focusing on lack of abuse and neglect for the child. If you do that, and they also happen to be watching a lot of television or playing a lot of games on their iPad, I would not be concerned, because if you have a secure attachment, if the kid is enjoying their life, if they feel like you have their back, if they don't have a lot of distress, if they're not worried about death or cancer or going poor, or if they're not having undue anxiety because of watching the news or something, and they feel like they can reach out to you, and they just happen to be one of those kids that just loves their iPad, like I wouldn't be worried about it.
Right.
In my experience, children raised in a secure environment, they don't want to be on screens all the time. And it's easier to interrupt. If you have a good relationship with your child and you say, hey, put the screen down, let's go play blah, 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 they will rather hang out with you and play blah, blah, blah than be on a stupid screen. So now, having said that, some kids will develop addiction, even in the face of a good relationship. And because some kids are just more prone, particularly if you start them early, honestly, because you start those neural pathways creating pleasure, when they're 18 months old. And even if it's a super simple game of like, touch the chicken and then the chicken like moves around, the feedback loop that even these simple games will create in their brain can really lock in a dopamine pathway that might get out of control over time.
I see.
And so, like trying to get my mom addicted to a game would be hard. Trying to get us addicted to a game is easier. Trying to get your kids addicted to a game would be simple. Because, there's a increase in neural pathways being developed with a particular pleasure pathway. So there is that sort of thing. But here's the problem.
The good news in the case of like my 11-year-old is that I think when you were just describing that she actually often chooses not to watch, and instead she loves going outside and things like that. But some of this could just be personality differences, because like the other one doesn't like going outside riding her bike, but is that because it's not just because of screens. A lot of times, even if she doesn't get to watch, she still doesn't want to go out.
It's hard to know, right? Because you can't unentangle, untangle this. The problem, though, is that we have too many stressed out, working parents or single parents. Not enough support. That's the problem. So instead of shaming everyone for allowing their kids to be on an iPad, what you need to be doing is saying, how have we gotten to a place in a society where isolation and lack of support for parents is the norm?
Yeah.
That's the problem. Because if you have the normal amount of caregivers, which is at least 2, if not 5 to 10, then if you have that, then the kids, they're not going to want to go on screens because they're going to have things to do, or they'll go on screens with you, because kids, they love hanging out with you if you're one of the primary caregivers. All they want to do is like, they want you to enter their world, you know what I mean? But that they would, if they could have you all day long, they would have, that's their preference. Yeah. So if they're turning to screens and turning away from people, it's because they've given up, right? There hasn't been enough of you. And so they kept bidding for that. And eventually they gave up and they said, well, at least I have screens.
Right.
All right, Berto, let's take a break. We get back, more emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. Let's do an OPP, Berto.
OPP.
So we have these people becoming patrons in November of 2019 and staying patrons through thick and COVID thin. We got Flying Fox, who is an annual from LT. What do you think that's? Latvia? LT.
Lithuania.
Oh, country code.
Lithuania. How do you say it?
Lithuania. You were right.
Yeah.
Lithuania.
Lithuania.
Alicia from Ohio. Cecilia.
Ohio.
From God Knows Where. Leah from God Knows Where. Jessica from Las Vegas.
Nice.
Margarita from Houston. Lydia from Denmark. I never. Is it DK? I think that's Denmark. It is.
Sure.
Tralala from God Knows Where. Brandon from California. Drew from Los Angeles, California. Alice from God Knows Where. Ryan from God Knows Where. And Jill from God Knows Where. Thank you so much for becoming a patron and staying a patron through thick and through thin.
Very good.
Okay. Let me organize my little doc here before I forget. And let's go to the next email. Next email from Up at Your Patron Paul says, I was adopted at 4 years of age, and I have strong negative reactions to scenes in films and TV shows where the parent acts to protect their children. So you following, Berto?
Yeah.
Adopted Paul, strong negative reactions when parents are depicted as protecting their children. While I do have a pretty secure relationship with my biological mother and adoptive father, I'm not sure why I react like this. What is going on? Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's counterintuitive because I thought it was going to go the other way, right? Like, for example, I think I mentioned before in the podcast that Kramer versus Kramer is one of my favorite movies, but it's very difficult when I'm watching it. I'm always really emotionally disturbed while I'm watching it because it's a movie about a couple getting divorced in a somewhat, whirlwind sort of way, and the little kid gets caught in the middle, and I could relate, from coming from divorced parents and things like that. But what I'm hearing in this case, it's that when the parent is trying to protect the child, that stirs up the negative emotions. Mm-hmm. And so that one's definitely puzzling to me. So I wonder if is it like, I wish that would have happened to me more, and so I'm upset that I'm seeing it here, or am I misunderstanding the
No, I think that's the
protection?
I think that's the the leading hypothesis to follow. Absolutely. Also could indicate uncovered. So Paul is saying, I feel like I have a pretty good relationship. I don't resent anybody. It could be that you have, it's normal when you are adopted to have even if it's not believed by your conscious mind, it's normal to have this sense of abandonment, right? Like, even though, let's say you were adopted at birth and you don't fault your biological parents, there's often a feeling of, well, it's not rational. There's just a tiny little feeling there that a lot of adoptees will have.
Oh, no, I see that. Okay, so basically, I'm watching a movie and the parent's like, not my child. Right. And then the person might be like, why didn't my biological parents not my child me?
Right. And even if on, like I said, the 99% of you is just like, well, I don't blame them. I don't really care. I've sort of dealt with that. Like I said, it's pretty normal. The other possibility is that you have uncovered, unconscious general feelings of abandonment that absolutely do have a logical genesis that you just really haven't faced yet. Those are the leading hypotheses that I would follow up with your therapist. All right. Patron Jenny from Toronto says, Berto, Kirk, what makes some people more prone to believe in pseudoscience? I find it's common amongst women and queer people, as I'm part of both communities. Many bring up things like horoscopes, tarot, crystal healing, witchcraft, etc. At first, I assumed it was just something fun and entertaining for these people. But I'm slowly realizing these people really believe in these things as fact and science for life advice and to assess personalities. I find many of them shift blame to their horoscope for their own negative traits, like, I'm toxic because I'm a Scorpio. To me, it feels like a way to shift responsibility off yourself to an external source, so it's less stressful to think about. I am really interested in learning the psychology behind what makes people believe in pseudoscience and who are more prone to believing this magical thinking. Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, so growing up in Colombia, I saw a lot of this. There is, because, Catholic country, and it comes from a mixed bag of belief systems where the natives had a lot of kind of more naturalistic beliefs and gods that were more of the land and things. And then it was intermixed with the Catholic belief system. And then so what resulted in, especially my grandma's generation and before, there was a lot of magical thinking that went along with the Catholicism. And so these were a lot of superstitions, a lot of things that you shouldn't say, ways you shouldn't do things because they would result in bad things. Like cats are evil. If you do that, like a lot of if you do that, you always got to make sure, like, we didn't have the salt thing, but we had things like that where you have to follow certain things,
like
not
what?
say certain things.
What was knock on wood? What was your knock on wood?
Well, actually, so the cracks on the pavement, as an example, wasn't like something I was aware of, but was a step on the crack, break your mother's back. But as a funny example, that is something my dad had learned briefly while being up here, and he thought that it was something that I believed in, because one day we were out for a walk and I was avoiding all the cracks, and he got super upset at me because he hates superstitions, and I didn't know why he was upset at me. Whereas, for example, my grandma actually had tons of superstitions that were things like things about ghosts, apparitions, or...
Well, no, what I was asking is, we have a knock on wood, or that you were saying salt over... What do you have to correct bad luck in Colombia?
I don't remember. Because I was little, but okay. I'm sure there are plenty of bad luck corrections. But there are things that are bad omens. Like I said, the black cat, absolutely. Cats in general are supposed to be bad. They kill babies. They're not good. And there's a lot of things that are pseudo magical. So, what is the homeopathy was very popular, and I remember there were a lot of homeopathic places, a lot of things with jewels and stones and lots of new agey things. And we would always drive by. My dad would always get so angry because he was like, oh, these liars, these charlatans, da 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 da. And I never understood any of it. I didn't understand what they were. I didn't understand why my dad was so upset about it. So it was always this really weird mix of things. Like I said, we'd be driving by and randomly my dad is in a rage. And I'm like, what's the problem, Dad? He's like, it's these homeopathy people. And I'm like, what do they do? Oh, they like say they can cure you. Or are they doctors? No, they're not doctors. And I was so confused. But there was a lot of that. And I think part of it stemmed from that cultural attachment to the mystic, to the, magical thinking. And also the fact that, honestly, I at least saw that there was some correlation to the amount of bad things happening in society.
Right.
Because you feel like you're out of control. You have no control over nature and the world. So you look to like, oh yeah, maybe I can go and get healed magically.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so before going into this, I want to say that most people around the world believe in what I would categorize as a supernatural belief, something that is beyond scientific ability to confirm or deny. For example, if you believe that your grandparents who passed away are watching over you, there's no way to disprove that hypothesis. If I came to you and I said, well, how do you know? Well, I just feel it. I have faith, or I believe it. Well, what else? Well, sometimes I feel like my grandma is talking to me and telling me, like this one time when my dog died and I felt like my grandma was there comforting me. I could almost hear her voice. There's no way for me to, design a scientific empirical study to disprove that, because you're only talking about your feelings and your sense and your faith. So or if you're a Catholic and you believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, there's no way for us to disprove that. We, as a historical figure, presumably lived 2,000 years ago. There's this abstract idea called sin. There's this unobservable place called heaven. There's this figure called God and the Holy Spirit. And there's just no way to measure that.
Right.
If you make a claim that your sword is stronger than my sword, there's a way we can test that. We could slam our swords together and see which one breaks first. There's a way of actually measuring these sorts of things. So if you, and most people believe in a supernatural thing, I will tell you that I have a supernatural belief that I have. So I'm not like, I don't reject all supernatural beliefs personally. And even if I did, I still wouldn't judge others for having it. What I will judge is when people are unethical about their supernatural beliefs. And I actually took some time to think about how you could have a supernatural belief and have it be unethical. What would you say, Berto? What's the difference between ethical supernatural belief and an unethical supernatural belief?
Well, some things that come to mind, one is the golden rule, but in general saying, hey, look, if my belief is going to start infringing on your rights and your freedom and your ability to be a happy human being, I find that unethical in a sense, right? So if I
so
say,
that's my number 4 is do no harm. Your supernatural belief cannot harm other people.
Right.
Believing that vaccines are from the devil is going to harm other people because you are more susceptible to the virus, you're more susceptible to vectoring. And so that's not okay. That's an unethical supernatural belief.
Another thing I would say is if I am using it to manipulate you, right? For example, it would have been easy for someone to manipulate my grandma, and I'm not just saying my grandma, like tons of grandmas, tons of people.
To get out of money or blah,
because
blah, blah.
of their belief in what they believe, right?
Yeah.
Because you could play into those things. And that's done all the time. That's the magical healers, the faith healers that know that they're not really doing anything, but they're conning people out of millions of dollars.
Yeah. So all of them, the three other ethical codes are basically based on the fourth one, which is do no harm, but they're more specific than that. My number 1 is you have to realize and admit that there's no scientific basis for your supernatural belief. And I find that a lot of people have a really hard time with that. They have a hard time, like I'll hear Christians, for example, they'll be like, no, there's scientific proof that God is, or that Jesus did it. And they'll cite some study that showed that prayer did blah, blah, blah. But when you actually zoom out and you look at all the data available to us on prayer, there's no signal there. There's no indication that prayer actually does anything. You know what I mean? It's okay that you believe that prayer does something. It's okay that you believe that God is hearing your prayers. It's okay that you believe that miracles are happening. It's not okay to me that you think that there's a scientific basis for that belief. So, because there isn't, is the thing. The other, because some people will say like, well, there's scientific proof that tarot cards work, that kind of thing. And it's like, there's not. We have looked at these things backwards and forwards for literally decades, and there is no signal in the data. You can still believe in it. You can still let it guide you, but you have to admit that it's a feeling, it's a vibe, it's a faith, it's an unnamed force that cannot be identified, and that's okay, but you cannot claim that science supports that claim.
I'd be so troubled. I can't believe people wouldn't be troubled if there were scientific proof that prayer worked, because then the next hypothesis is that the all-powerful being in charge doesn't actually care about events in and of themselves. If someone's suffering, it's like, who cares? But if someone's advocating, okay, I might listen.
Well, I mean, that is the basis of Christianity, most sects Christianity, which is that if you turn your back on God, God turns his back on you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's got no basis in even in the Bible or whatever. It's supposed to be like, no, like
ask and ye shall receive, bro. So number 2 is don't impose your beliefs on other people. This is kind of a version of harm. Yeah. Your belief system is one of millions that are existing now and billions that have existed ever. So do not think that even if you believe in astrology or something, understand that your version of understanding astrology is probably unique, or a pocket of it. So don't impose on it. Don't like, well, my version of, Islam is better than yours. It's like, just relax. You can maybe try to convince people like, oh, my system's pretty great, but don't impose it, because that's not okay.
But it is a problem in that some of these belief systems, as part of their architecture, have the imposition in their design.
Right,
so you're
which is wrong, which is unethical.
Evangelize.
Well, there's a difference between, I grew up in a Christian church and they called witnessing, and that meant that captured a lot of behavior. So one of the behaviors it caught was leading by example. That's a way of witnessing, because the witnessing, I think, meant I've witnessed the glory of Jesus, and so I'm proselytizing my what I've seen, I guess, is the word witness. And so leading by example, which is not imposing, right? Then another version of witnessing is literally knocking on someone's door and like bothering them, that kind of thing.
Right.
Number 3 is do not use your supernatural belief as an excuse for things that harm the world, like global warming. Well, that's God's plan. Or I'm toxic. Well, that's just because I'm a Scorpio. Like, that's not okay. So, but all those are basic versions on, do no harm. So that's my take. You can believe in whatever supernatural belief you want to, and you could believe all of them, and you believe none of them. But if you start messing with others and harming the planet or society or humans or imposing on people, then we got a problem. And if you start believing that you're right and everyone else is wrong, we got a problem, because you're not right and everyone else isn't wrong. What's the chance
we have
that
this
you just happen to land on the one supernatural belief that happens to be true, and literally the millions of other belief systems are wrong? What's the chance of that being true?
Well, we have this kind of funny, unspoken Cold War which is, we say, hey, you're free to believe whatever you want. In fact, this is the land of the free. We can freedom of religion, stuff like that. But what's implicit there is, like, we don't believe any of you. And it is, when I say we, it's almost like the system doesn't believe any of you.
Right.
But people find that very troubling because they're like, but what do you mean? This is the truth of all truths. In a previous episode, we were talking about like the seatbelt law and how it infringes on our freedoms, but it was like for a greater good to save lives and things. And, you know, there's people that believe that if they don't give you the message that they have, and if you don't do what you need to do to save yourself, like the price is ultimate, and therefore it's like seatbelts for the afterlife. And so it's really hard. It's a really hard thing to balance out, because totally. I 100% agree with you that like it needs to stop. The belief system needs to stop where it starts hurting someone else.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I remember being told an analogy that as a Christian, you know that you're saved, you're baptized, you believe in Jesus, you're going to heaven. As long as you ask for forgiveness, you're going to heaven, and that's just a given. For those who haven't found Jesus and haven't been baptized, they are not going to heaven. They're going to hell. They're going to eternal damnation, burning, suffering, eternal pain and horribleness for all of eternity.
Right.
And so it's your job. You're a horrible person if you don't try to save those people. You're a despicable human being. And the analogy was, you are driving at night in the fog, and all of a sudden you drive across a bridge, and all of a sudden you see that the bridge is out. And there's a big chasm that's down, a mile chasm, and everyone's going to die if you go off. And you notice it in time, and you stop. And you get out of the car, and you look into the chasm, oh my God, it's a foggy night.
Yeah.
And you see some headlights coming. Well, you don't just stand by and watch them go off into the darkness.
No.
You get in the middle of that road, you scream. You can't stop them physically because you're not big enough, but you're going to yell, and you might even throw a rock at their car. So that was the analogy that was given to us. Now, that's not okay.
Well,
because that breaks my first rule, which is realize and admit there's no scientific basis, and two, don't impose it on other people. It's not.
Because there's a little bit missing from the analogy. So what actually happens is you're driving in the middle of the night, it's foggy, and all of a sudden you get a feeling that up ahead is a cliff. You don't see it.
Right.
Get a feeling.
Right.
So what you decide to do, because you got to save the others, is you turn the car 180 degrees, and any car that you see coming at you, you front end crash into them to save them.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, now, like I said, if you believe in a supernatural belief, Christianity, Islam, astrology, tarot, crystal healing, witchcraft, whatever, if you believe in any of those things, in all of them, then that's okay. But you cannot break the ethical codes.
What if you believe in Henry David Thoreau? Can you break them there? Factors
in belief, and there, we've looked into, as a field, this topic many times, because there's a lot of, it's not hard to do. You ask someone, a series of questions about their belief system, and you kind of codify them on like how religious they are and how dominant their supernatural beliefs are in their life. Because certainly you could have a Christian who it just doesn't really dominate their life. They go to church, right. They try to be good, they give to charity, but they're not witnessing, or it's just not on their mind all the time. So you can gauge someone's religiosity, and then you can also measure other personality traits, right? Other experiences. And what they found are the following. And this is according to research and also according to me. I'm sort of interweaving the two things. Number one, as you said, Berto, is cultural pockets. So the cultural pocket that you are in and raised in particularly is a powerful influencer. Your grandma did not believe in the magical things that she believed in because she was born that way. She believes those things because everyone around her believed those things.
Right.
And when you're 0 to 20 and literally everyone defines reality in a certain way,
why would you question that?
Yeah, it's going to be pretty convincing. And plus, it's not just like, hey, the spirit, the forest spirit doesn't like it when you like my Filipino friends will talk about how, or God, was it Filipino or was it Ireland? I'm trying to remember which one, but one of them, maybe both, you're not supposed to point because there are these magical spirits everywhere. And if you point, even if you're just saying, hey, look at that clock over there.
Yeah.
There are all these little magical creatures that if you point, they will think you're pointing at them and that's rude. And so they might get you. So you're never supposed
someone told me this.
You're never supposed to point with your finger. You're supposed to verbally say, hey, over there by that clock,
Wait, I've heard of this before.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So you
pretty
can't point.
Yeah, you can never point.
Okay. So if you're at like the store, it's like, which one would you like?
You just say it's on the third. It's over there by the third.
Just point at it. I can't. I can't do that.
Yeah, because there's a belief in little magical creatures that are are benevolent when they like you and malevolent when they don't like you. So
does it count with computer pointers, like with your mouse?
Yeah. Well, that would blind them. They get really upset. Anyway, or they'll chase them around. Anyway, cultural pocket is a and it's not just the belief system that's passed down to you, but it's also the evidence that is also present. So they give you the system of thinking, and then say you get sick, and they're like, they ask you, did you point? And you say, well, maybe I did.
I might have.
And they'll say, well, that's because you pointed. So it's compounded with seeming hard evidence of the system actually being true. It's not just read about this system. It's like you're living it and being all this confirmation bias that's also propagated by those around you. And so by the age of 20, if you grow up in a particular cultural pocket, you not only believe it, but you have droves of evidence that this supernatural system is reality.
Yeah.
And again, that's okay as long as you're ethical about it. Number two is, I've seen this, is that if you hate your childhood supernatural system, like you grew up Catholic and you hate Catholicism, and you didn't do this, Berto, some people I will see as an adult, once they gain the freedom, will reject everything about their childhood, Catholicism in particular, whatever religion that they were oppressed by, they will reject wholeheartedly. But because they are still subconsciously adhering to the premise of that supernatural system, they will find another supernatural system to follow instead. So
interesting.
I've seen a lot of people who are like staunch witchcraft people who hated Catholicism growing up. But when I observe their witchcraft practice, and this isn't all witchcraft, Wiccan people, but when I observe, it looks to me like they're just recreating Catholicism
it's derived from that.
With new names, and a different kind of vibe, a different look to it. But they're still observing what comes around goes around, which is, a Christian idea, the idea of ritual, and there's certain things, and that's okay. Like I said, as long as you're ethical about it, there's nothing wrong with that. Number three is desperation. As you were saying, Berto, I call it desperation. When you're afraid, and we've seen this in the research, when people are afraid of society or their own death, there's a saying that's like every atheist becomes a religious person in a foxhole.
In the foxhole,
I can't remember the exact phrase, but essentially when you're at war and you feel like you're going to die, you turn to God, is one of those things. And because you're desperate and you're just like, well, one, what if? And two, I just think that there's maybe a psychological or maybe a supernatural, but if I'm speaking from the psychological angle, a reaction from us, because, when we were children, we had parents. When we're 6 months old, our parents are gods to us. They can do anything. They can walk and talk and buy things and give us food. Like they are the givers. They're magical creatures. These parents. By the time we're 5, we've outgrown that, but for the most part. But when we're really young, we have literal, or not literal, but we have like gods in our life. Anyway, so when we are very scared and afraid, we regress. We become, you might see this in your kids sometimes, Berto, when they have emotional episodes, they might whine like they did 5 years ago. They might even like, things that they liked 5 years ago. Like they suddenly they like their stuffies again, and so we do this as adults. And when we're extremely stressed out, we might even regress to that of a 12-month-old child.
Well, we've heard the sad, crazy situations, like with the guy that was murdered by the cop, where he was calling out for his mother.
Right, exactly. It's this desperation of, we go to this deep part of our brain where it's just like, save me, mom, or God above. Like we're just like, yeah, exactly.
I had a, oh, sorry, were you
No, please, I was going to go on to the next one.
I had a situation when I was, so I've talked about this in the podcast before. So I got very sick with something called Graves' disease, which is where your thyroid starts being very overactive. And sometimes it can lead to something called a thyroid storm, which can be life-threatening. So I had sort of a mini thyroid storm, which was bad enough, and I landed in the hospital. This is about a year and some months ago. And when I was there, and they were trying to figure out how to help me, at one point they had to do this procedure that's like a shock. And the guy told me, like, so just, there's a risk that when we do this, like, there could be a clot that dislodges and goes to your brain and you could die. And I was like, okay. And I think they'd given me some sedative or something, so I wasn't like panicking, but I was like, oh, okay. But I guess we got to do what we got to do. But then the weirdest thing happened. Again, I was like sort of, they must have given me something. I think they have to give you something when they do this.
Jesus came to you in a vision?
No, the guy, the ER guy came up to me and he's like, I don't remember exactly, but he was like, do you know Jesus? Are you saved?
He said that?
Yeah. And I was like, oh no, sorry, I don't believe. And he's like, well, this is your chance because we're about to do the thing. And I'm like, oh no, I'm good, I'm okay.
Oh my God!
He was trying to make sure I was saved and converted, or saved, whatever, And it was the foxhole situation, and I was like, yeah, I've been through this mentally, but thank you. It's like, I appreciate it. But it's weird, right? It's also unethical in a sense, because what if I were a Muslim, or what if I were something else? It's like, and in that. If you think about
even if you're an atheist, it's like, come on, like, stop
right. Well,
it.
It's from their perspective, they're trying to save my afterlife. But from my perspective,
and I respect their perspective, but
right.
I think ethically, it's sort of like if you're a senator, you can believe in whatever you want to believe, but you will not make laws based on that belief system, because we have a separation between church and state.
And what they don't understand too, of course I wasn't about to explain it in that moment, is that if we live in the kind of universe where I can somehow undo my sins and my atheism just by at the last second bargaining for my afterlife by saying, yeah, I believe, well, then we have bigger problems. And so I was like,
well,
thank you.
To defend Christians who might be thinking, what they will say is, Jesus is a loving God.
Clearly not enough, right?
I know. I mean, as long as you do X, Y, and Z.
As long as you do the right things.
But he wants to forgive you, but you have to ask for forgiveness. He leaves it up to you, but if you never ask, then he can't do anything for you. He's powerless.
Hey, you didn't ask.
Yeah. Well,
I know, but it's been 6 trillion years. And it seems so plausible that it was all made up. Sorry, you didn't ask.
yeah.
Anyways, but it was a really bizarre.
Surprised that wasn't the first thing you told me after you got out of surgery. Like,
yeah, right. Like I mean, this wasn't surgery. This was not surgery. This was 6 months before my surgery. It was in the ER. It was in the ER when they were trying to. They weren't trying to save me.
That's even worse. Like, you weren't going to die. Oh, no. So you're saying that you might have got it.
I could have died.
Right. So I'm surprised that you didn't tell me about that right afterwards. That's a pretty interesting detail.
Right. And it was very, like, in the moment, I was like, this is so weird. Like, I'm about to go through this, and you're sitting
where am
here.
I? Like, am I in church or am I in the hospital? What's happening? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because the thing I'll say, because a lot of people will be like, well, he's a Christian. Let's just imagine that he was a QAnon believer. Right. And he whispered in Berto's ear, and he's like, so I just want to make sure that before you go into the afterlife that, you make sure, I don't even know what QAnon believers believe in.
Well, no, but flip it around to, like, what if I were a Christian and I had already, like, had my peace with it and stuff. And in that moment, he's from some other belief system and he somehow convinces me out of fear. And all of a sudden I renounce my Christianity and now I die. And actually it turns out it was real. And now my afterlife is ruined.
Well, that's not the point I'm getting at. The point I'm getting at is you have to understand that even though in your area, your belief system is dominant, it's just one of millions of belief systems. And so why are you introducing it? Everyone understand, like if you made up a religion of one and said like, I believe that cabbage is God, it's okay to believe that, but it's still a supernatural belief system. You can't.
But as you know, it's a catch-22 for them because they really believe it. And so since they believe it's actually real, they don't care because they're trying to save you.
I know. And that's when and like I said, growing up Christian myself, there were those who would say, you must beat down doors. And there were others that said, don't be a dick. and
I mean, look,
and I remember even getting, I don't remember exactly being told this because, it was throughout my childhood, but I was under the impression that Jesus would let everyone into heaven if they tried to be a good person, regardless of whether they were baptized or not, So, there were Christians out there that they just said, well, yeah, I mean, we're going to heaven, and a lot of non-Christians are going to heaven too,
Yeah.
So, you don't,
well,
it's not a desperate situation. God's not an idiot. If someone's good and they're in a pocket of the world, like where they're not exposed to Christianity, God's not going to make them go to hell. I mean, that doesn't seem fair.
Well, I had to use a lot of those rationalizations on myself because I would go to sleep many times very, very worried about my dad. And I was always trying to figure out the right way to convert him because he was an atheist. And so I was always like, okay, if I just... And so I would have these debates with him, or not even debates.
I don't think I knew that. I don't think I knew that you believed as a kid.
Oh, of course. Like I was 100% Roman Catholic, and it's just that my dad didn't allow me to. He didn't allow for me to go to church on Sundays. That was the main thing. But I watched the mass on TV. Not all every.
So
Sunday,
when did you lose your religion, as Michael Stipe said?
So first, I left Catholicism after I graduated high school and I started college because I was very aware of the corruption in that church. Nothing happened to me, but like.
But when did you stop believing in God?
Okay, so that took me another 13 years, and that was I think around 33. I think.
So at 25 years of age, you believed in God.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100. I would get in debates at work with my friends trying to.
God, you are such a different person. When you described to me, even just a few years before I met you, you were just you were a jealous, God.
Yes
believing.
And no. Yes and no. Like you would have recognized most of Berto, but then some things about me, you would have been like
an angry drunk. Like you talk about getting
odd.
you. That
yeah,
you were
right. There's
drunk.
some parts where you would have been like, that's not the Berto I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, number 4 is magical thinking in general. So we understand that there's a slider of personality, which is some people are more prone to magical thinking than others. Not in a bad way, just a different susceptibility to what we call magical thinking. And for some people, it's a sign of trauma that because all children have magical thinking in droves. That's why you can talk about Santa and the Tooth Fairy because they just
because those are real, and so those are easy because you're not making anything up. But in other examples,
and they're often in their play world anyway, and the differentiation between reality and fantasy is their brains just don't really get it yet, and so if you are traumatized at those ages, sometimes you can retain that magical thinking throughout your entire life. Some people also just have a really incredible imagination, and so they're just more comfortable or more susceptible, or it doesn't feel like, for some people, and maybe you're kind of like this, Berto, when you introduce something that's supernatural, it's actually like repulsive to them. You know, they're just like, but that's not real. You know, there's a certain rigidity to like concrete reality that some people have. Well, on the other end of the spectrum, there's some people that just are really comfortable with ambiguity, I guess, and lack of evidence, you know, and going with their gut rather than what they can see with their own two eyes. And so, again, so sometimes it's trauma related and development related. Sometimes it's actually like IQ related. And sometimes it's just some people, you know, just really imaginative people. So that's another thing that correlates with supernatural or beliefs, or pseudoscientific, as you're putting it, Jenny. Number 5 is a lack of critical thinking, which is really the norm in our society and around the world. There's a lack of education, and particularly associated around supernatural beliefs. I mean, how many schools cover this topic of how to determine the difference between a belief system that has evidence and one that doesn't, you know, like school, because you would piss off every parent, you know, because you're talking about their religion.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you know, the fact
institutionally, this is absolutely at the core of a lot of our problems, is that we have institutionalized, not recently, just for millennia, for forever, we have institutionalized the ability for us to be supernatural believers. And therefore, how can we tell people that something they believe isn't real? Like, who are we?
Right. Now, I will always get emails from teachers saying, you don't understand, you know, I'm teaching kids critical thinking. Yeah, good, but we're clearly not doing enough. And so if you're doing all you can, kudos to you, really. But the average 18-year-old lacks sufficient or any ability to think critically and evaluate evidence and to understand their own bias. Like, it's just a thing. Now, is it even possible that we could get 18-year-olds and really everyone to have a adequate amount of critical thinking? I don't know. But
it's even worse because nowadays, in the sense that the narrative is, do your own research. The narrative is, a lot of these folk not only don't know how to do research, but they actually believe that they're the best at it.
Right. They go on Facebook and they read a thing, and then that's their research. Yeah.
It's so bad.
Yeah. And to be clear, one of the main elements of critical thinking and scientific literacy is constantly questioning your own belief system, and always, I mean, not like a constant, like, I don't know anything, but like being slightly skeptical about what you want to be true, and acknowledging that maybe you don't know everything, you know. So that is not a foundational trend among humans.
Right.
And you have to, it's a discipline, you know. It's like learning how to be a good 3-point shooter. You don't just know how to do that. You have to practice it. For me, critical thinking is a skill that I continually have to bone up on, if you will.
Absolutely.
And I'll slide back into being in love with my own ideas and taking certain philosophies for granted and not saying, well, you know, I kind of want that to be true. Is it really true? And so the, you know, critical thinking is complicated, and, you know, most people are just trying to make ends meet on a daily basis, and they just don't have time for that. Number 6 is mistreatment by mainstream institutions. So when you were mistreated by medicine or religion or politics, but you want to believe in something, then sometimes, and this is similar to, you know, my second one, but it has more to do with like you know, if you were traumatized or disappointed by an institution, you know, just take the medical profession, for example. Let's say that you have an illness that doctors just cannot figure out what's wrong, or maybe even they're dismissive of you, which really is.
I mean, I can speak directly to this.
Yeah.
Like, it's basically, through, if anyone out there is unlucky enough to have a rare disease or something that doesn't happen as much, which Graves' disease, which is what I have, is one of them. Well, because it's kind of rare or it doesn't happen as much, there's just not as much funding and research and knowledge and things. So as a result, you just can't get an easy, clear answer.
And but it'd be one thing, Berto, maybe you're getting this. If a doctor was just like, you know what, I can't figure out that's not what they said. What they said is it's all in your head.
It's all in your head.
There's something
depending
wrong
on
with
the doctor, of course, but I certainly had this experience, which was like, here's your prescription, see me in 3 months. And then when I write back or call and say, I'm having really bad, like I'm really sick. I've been to the ER 3 times this week. It's this dismissive attitude. Like, it's you're not listening to the science. And so then what do I feel? I'm like, okay, I'm going to go online and do my own research and then start finding some anecdotal evidence about if I eat dandelion root at midnight on a full moon, I might actually get cured.
Right. And because you are scientifically literate and you literally have an IQ of someone in the top percentile, top 1 percentile. I've tested Berto's IQ. He's like, really high up there. I literally really like the 99 percentile.
Hate it when you bring this up.
Why?
Because it's embarrassing. Because now people think now people are going to be randomly testing me with questions, and I'm going to sound like an idiot. Like, well, okay, what's 2 + 2? 5. Oh, damn it.
Well, I mean, I think you do good at stuff like that, but and it's not knowledge. It's brain power. Your ability to make connections. Your ability to understand several things at once. That's what IQ is. And so
I think you tested me before the pot cookie incident. So I no longer, I don't know if that's still true.
Was it? I don't know if that's true. Anyway, it's around then, that's for sure. But anyway, so because you have those skills and your dad drilled a lot of that into you, and maybe that's your cultural pocket is critical thinking, you went down a lot of rabbit holes, some better than others, but you never went down a rabbit hole of falsehood, if you will. Like, this crystal will save your life, or
right.
Go to my special program in Mexico and I can cure you, or pray to this rock and all will be well.
Yeah, my falling downs were much more mundane than that. It was like, give me this money and I'll send you a magazine. It's like, oh, okay.
Or a supplement thing that you experimented with for a short amount of time, like.
Oh God. One time, I remember one of my friends convinced me to try ephedrine for working out and like losing weight or something. I had one of those pills and it was such a caffeine overdrive in my body. Yeah. It felt terrible. Oh,
you took too much. You took their dose, not your dose. Anyway, so because of all those reasons, you were okay. But imagine if you didn't have, just a lifetime of protective factors. It would be extremely easy under that circumstance to be seduced into another system. Because the medical system, although in my view abused you and wronged you in a lot of ways, it still unfortunately has the answers and had eventually got, the medical system eventually did narrow in on the answer. It was finding the right people or being the squeaky wheel, or you literally would bring research to the physicians and please read this. And you found a physician that actually took the time to, let's read that. Yeah. And so
to humor me and at least tell me why it's not applicable or whatever. Yeah.
So, because of your doggedness and your privilege and your access, and you got the medical system, which is the system that you needed to go to. They eventually, diagnosed you correctly, and now you're under treatment that you're by the medical system that you're doing better. But imagine if you didn't have all of those things, bro.
Oh, jeez.
And someone comes along and tells you, especially if it's, what you grew up in, and said, I have the answer. It is, lighting pigs on fire and dancing in a circle, and that's what my father did.
Tried, but
that's what my father's father and when I got sick, I did that, and I was paralyzed, and now I can walk, and and you watch a TV show where that happens. Like, you could imagine falling into that, and there's so much confirmation bias, and once you're in that system, and you have all, and even if you did periodically go back to the medical system, you'd continually be the idea would be reinforced. The medical system is not there to help you, and
it's not. And
the other point I'll say is that these systems of supernatural organizations will provide a community, because the medical doctor doesn't want to hang out with you afterwards. It just they just reject you. You go to an organization, they will burn the pig, and you can dance around, and they'll
stay there.
They'll cry with you. They'll hang out with you. They'll talk with you, and you feel taken care system, of. You feel like they really care about you. They see you, and so it's it's very seductive.
I was going to add that in many cases in these cultural pockets, there are belief systems that are handed down that seem on the border of supernatural, but actually are just practical things that end up working out for reasons that they don't fully understand. As an example, my stepdad was kind of thinning out. His hair was thinning out a bit. And one day I see, and he's like rubbing his head with this pasty goo. And I'm like, what is that? It's like, oh, it's fermented pineapple rind. And I'm like, huh? Why are you doing that? Oh, it's like an old traditional thing in the village I grew up in Colombia. And apparently it helps you. I'm like, okay. Well, turns out that there is some science beneath the belief, because the enzymes created in that fermentation eat away at the skin cells so that the pores open back up and blah blah blah. Long story short, apparently it helps, right? But they don't understand why. There's no, obviously when they were doing it, there was no science. It's like how did bread come about? Someone just like ate some fermented yeast thing and it's like, oh, we should do this. Same thing. But when you have a lot of these little things and some of them seem to help, and they're mixed in with a lot of other things, you might just ingest the whole package, right? Like, fine, yeah. I'll take it all.
Right. So if some belief system incorporated the, fermented pineapple stuff, and it had 99 other things that didn't have any scientific basis,
right? How
would you know as a recipient of that? Especially if everyone's saying, well, the 99 things absolutely do work. And anyway, and your Facebook echo chamber claims. Anyway, so number 7 is having a profound experience is another reason why people will adhere to a supernatural belief system.
That makes sense.
For good or for bad. If you go to, if you're not, well, let's take Landmark, for example, that you could almost consider that to be
right.
Kind of religious for some people, the adherence, the proselytizing, that you have an emotional experience at Landmark that is, real. But if you don't know how to interpret it, and if the powers that be really try to make you interpret it as you just had an experience that was attributable to our program, please pay us more money. I'm not saying Landmark is bad. Landmark can absolutely be good. You can have a system of therapy. You can go to therapy. In fact, one of the things that I would see professors doing, this is interesting actually, I won't go into too much detail, but when I was coming up as a young professor, I had some mentors and I would watch them operate, and I would see them do things, and I was like, whoa, that's interesting. And among all the various things that I would incorporate and or reject that I observed, one of the things that I saw was that some professors, they didn't say it this way, but the way I saw it from the outside was they would create an emotional experience for the students. They would knowingly lead the group slowly into, not manipulate or I don't know, and not non-consensual, but they would because a lot of the professors, or all the professors, were therapists and understand emotions, and some of these therapists are very used to and comfortable with emotional expressions, right? And most Americans are pent up. And so it's not hard, if you understand what you're doing, to create an environment where students will consensually walk into an emotional meat grinder. That doesn't harm them. It's not harmful to them,
right.
but
it's intense.
But it's intense, you know?
Yeah.
And so I would watch that, and I respected the professors that did it, but I never wanted to do that. I would do it a little bit, but I would always ask for volunteers. I would never do it for everyone. You know, I would say, you know, we're going to do this exercise, you know, as my own sort of version of it. And I would say, but you have to understand that this could be intense for you. Yeah. And so the rest of the class could bow out. They could just be like, well, I'm not going to raise my hand. I don't want to do that. Right. You know, and it was only like a handful of students that would do it at a time. So anyway, when you are, say, sad and you go to a supernatural meetup or something and you're kind of on the fence, but then you have this massive emotional experience,
right?
A euphoric experience, or even a painful, you know, some people talk about ayahuasca in this really religious way, or LSD.
Or even those the smoke cabins, right? Like, yeah, they go in to sit there in the very super hot.
Yeah, hot yoga, for example.
The hot yoga, but there's the one that's the Native American thing. Where
right, hot.
It's like super hot. And
sweat lodge.
Sweat lodge, yeah, that.
Right, exactly. So, or fasting, you know.
Right.
It's either understood or not understood that by the individuals doing this, that when you create even if it's a negative emotional experience, it can, if you're primed, you will emerge with a strong connection with a particular belief system.
Oh, sure.
And that's well documented in the research.
Did you ever go to any of those large revivals, like kind of evangelical in the big stadiums? Like,
no.
Okay, so I had many friends in high school that were Reborn Christian denominations, and so I was invited to a few of these. And I remember one in particular. It was at a stadium. I've never seen so many people gathered for one event.
Is the stadium still there?
Religious.
Is it still there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it was Tacoma Dome.
Oh, you were in the Tacoma Dome?
I think so.
Wow.
If it wasn't that, it was some other very large
So for those who don't know, Tacoma Dome is like as big as a baseball stadium, essentially.
Yeah.
It's a huge.
Now, it wasn't like all the stands were filled, right? But there were probably 5,000 people at least. I've never seen so many people for a religious thing.
You think we're going to church, it's going to be this, group of a couple hundred people or something.
Yeah, and this was like massive, on a massive scale. Okay, so we're there. And so, of course, they have all the huge lights, and it's essentially like a big concert, right? Because they have all the music, and they have the big events, and the people are getting healed, and the people are speaking in tongues. And now, at the time, I was a Catholic, but I didn't believe in any of the additional things, let's say. Even as a Catholic, I already didn't do most of the special little things you have to do. So I'm looking around, and I am not moved, but I am realizing how powerful this is, because people are in tears, and they're shaking, and they're kind of like having sort of out-of-body experiences, it looks like. And of course, how would you come out of that? Because I felt that with a music concert,
right?
Without the supernatural bits.
When you go to see a real popular DJ or a popular musical artist, the people in the audience, if the performers are knowing what they're doing, it has that orgasmic experience. Now, so what I'll say about what you're observing is, on one hand, if you're not locked in on that organizational system, and someone induces an emotional experiences in you, and then locks in an association with that belief system, with that emotional experience, then you're going to be much more open to that organizational belief system, regardless of it. Maybe it's the Democratic Party, for example. That's why they do rallies, and the National Convention isn't just a bunch of speeches. It's it's on purpose trying to provoke an emotional response in people, and so there's that. But then there's also the experience, which I'm guessing a lot of people you're observing, when you are totally in a belief system. you want to express your emotions because our society doesn't let you. And so there are certain venues where they'll let you, like a concert or a revival. These are venues where it's normal to completely just express. And it's a chance to express yourself. And so you go maybe habitually just knowing like, I'm going to get a lot of things off my chest. Movies are like that. A lot of tear-jerky movies are an opportunity to express yourself, and because we're not allowed to do it in our regular. Number 8, the last one is when you lack meaning, then these systems will provide you with meaning. Mm-hmm. If you don't have any purpose or guidelines for like what you're supposed to be doing in life, if you just like, well, we all just die and it just becomes nothing. There's potential angst and sadness and despair in that. Whereas if someone says, well, no, actually, there's an afterlife and there's a meaning and God wants this, or the stars are telling you this and this is what you're supposed to do. It really is comforting. It's a huge, huge comfort. The difference between grandma's dead and in the ground and grandma is in paradise and waiting for me. There's a
still
huge,
arthritic, but still she's waiting.
There's a huge chasm, maybe the biggest chasm in, abstract thought that ever existed between those two ideas. And if all it takes is for you to believe, and especially if it's a dominant belief system that everyone else believes in, like, why would you not?
Why would you not do it?
You're even if there's a part of you that's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is BS, but what's the harm? Right? Like, you can only, if you're going off the cliff in a car into the fog, why not believe that you're going to be okay? It won't matter if you die anyway, right?
Or like in that analogy, it's like if you're the other driver coming down the road and someone is flagging you or something, why not be safe, right? Like, it is foggy. Maybe there could be a risk here. Why not just pull off and check it out? Yeah.
Yeah. What's the harm? Like,
and honestly, and I've seen, there are people that live their lives in that way. And I think there's probably not actually much harm to that, right? They live their life aligned. They're productive members of society. They don't impose on other people. They have a belief that they'll be happy in the afterlife, and they do things morally and ethically, and so great, right? As you were saying earlier, with all these superstitious things, if it just stops there, like, yeah, I read my horoscope and but I don't do anything. Like, I don't bet my life savings on the day that it says that Aquarius should, like, fine, right? Like, it's fine. But I think, unfortunately, so many times with these superstitions, I'm seeing it right now. Like, I've mentioned this in other podcasts. A lot of my family members down in Colombia are very superstitious and believe in a lot of conspiracy and a lot of things. And they are not getting their vaccines, and that's...
Right,
very
and
unfortunate thing.
That's one of my ethical codes that you're breaking. So I just thought of another one, Berto, as you were talking, that you were illuminating, which is number 9 is if you're lonely, being of a supernatural organization ends your loneliness.
Yeah,
like,
true.
You can go from complete isolation to having 25 people who are 100% in your corner if you become a Mormon, for example. So, and if you then conversely consider leaving, then you are giving up those 25 people,
Absolutely. Like in the example of the guy that invited me to go to a reunion when I was starting college. I was in a new college. I had a couple people I knew, but I would have 10x'd my number of social contacts overnight.
Yeah. And for me, I don't know if I ever talked about this, not because I'm ashamed or anything. It's just not something that comes up. But when I was in middle school, the youth group in my church really pursued me. They really tried to get me in their youth group.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was shy and just scared, and I just was like, nah. And I had friends, but it wasn't like I was hanging out. Middle school was kind of a time, at least in my neighborhood, where you didn't really hang out with your friends that much. It wasn't, it was kind of at least for me and my neighborhood, it was kind of an isolated.
What's middle school again? What grades? That's 6th?
6 through 8, yeah.
Right.
7 through 9, 6 through 8. They were really pursuing me, and I kept dodging them, and I was like, no, I don't want to. I think mainly I was just shy. I was just like scared, And then one time, I think my parents must have been in cahoots with them, because I think they literally just showed up at the house and said, all of them, it's like, come with us. And I'm like, it couldn't say no kind of a thing. And I was like, and so I went.
It would have been super awkward if you're like, no.
Right, exactly. And I went, and I had a blast, and I'm sure that they tried to make it a blast for me. But, it was great. And it was, there's a young youth minister who was probably literally like 19 years old or something, but he seemed ancient.
And he's cool.
And he was cool, and he played guitar. Actually, a good deal of my guitar attraction was probably from youth group.
There you go.
Yeah. In fact, the first song I wrote was based on my memory of a song that the youth pastor would play. It was, instead of playing the bar chord, the E, just the E major chord when you're playing, bar chords are kind of hard. So, but if you just play the E chord on certain frets up the, fretboard, you can actually play a pleasing. So if you play an A without the bar, it still kind of sounds like an A because you got the E. You just have
a little extra harmony in
you just got a little B in there, and then you can play an actual B.
Right.
And that's actually, and it has an E in, does B have an E? No, right? So it just has an E, and just adds a little color, and it actually could sound really nice. And it's easy to play.
It gives you that little bit of a augmented, or not augmented, but like the third gets up to the E, and so it's like, ooh, what's going on here?
Right. What is that? Would that? Let's see it. See a B with an E. That would be like a B6 or something, or no, B4, or I don't know. Anyway, or B.
It's the fourth of the scale. It's the fourth of the scale.
Yeah.
So it is it's like an added fourth, right?
Oh,
so it's a nice sound.
B add 4, is that what they call it? Okay.
It's a nice sound.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, I loved it, and then they became my best friends for the next couple of years. We went on trips to Mexico and Montana, and we did everything together.
Nice.
It was a lot of older kids who were super cool. They were into new wave music, and they listened to like Simply Red and
nice
and New Order and just all this super cool music. And I just remember worshiping them. They had cool hair. They were kind of like The Cure, and their sense of humor was so cool. And I just remember really looking up to them. And a lot of my therapy-ness came from that, because we would sit in circles and talk a lot.
Right.
There's just a lot of support and crying. And
I had a similar experience to yours in that when I moved up here, I was 15, so I was a little older, I guess, but my mom enrolled me in the youth group at her church. And I had never been to a youth group. I had no idea what a youth group was. But I met Ty Verzoni there, and so immediately I made a great friend who was into The Cure and into New Order and all these things. And it was fun, same thing, kind of young youth minister, and we had a good group of kids, and we talked, like you said, covered a lot of different topics, and we went on retreats. One time we went to Mexico. We got to go to Disneyland on the way down. There's a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, and
I have a lot of fun memories.
On our trips when we did these really amazing things. Like in Mexico, we built homes for.
We did that too.
For the poor people in Mexico.
Yeah, we built a home and a kitchen. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was on the way back that we went to Disneyland.
They were these houses like, President Carter's.
Yep.
What do they call it?
The kind of houses that a group of teenagers could smack together.
Yeah, it was just really probably like a 10-by-8 structure that just kept them out of the rain or something. Anyway, so So I think loneliness is another reason, so that leads me to, Paul Jenny's original question, which is, horoscopes, for example. Well, if you don't have a religion, or maybe even if you do, horoscopes bring people together. If you have a belief system around horoscopes, which is fine, again, realize there's not a scientific basis, don't impose it on others, don't use it as an excuse to do bad things and do no harm. But if you believe in it and you understand it's not scientifically, supported, then it's great, and there's a lot of benefits to it. You have a language to speak to other people, if there's an understanding. It's like, well, I'm a Scorpio. You can instantly tell someone else who you are or what you think who you are. If you're just like, hey, I'm a Scorpio, it can bond you with other people, because other people will be like, oh, I'm a fire sign like a Scorpio, and so we're supposed to be good. People will use it kind of as an excuse to be friends. It's like, oh, well, it's in the stars, we're supposed to be friends.
Well, look, I don't believe in any of it, but yet I've had many ad hoc conversations with people about it, and I'm like, I'm an Aquarius. Oh yeah, you're this or that. My dad's a Scorpio, and it opens up avenues of meeting people and having conversations.
Right. And it provides meaning, it provides identity. If you don't have, maybe that's another one. Actually, I'm going to add that to the list.
And it guides all your decisions.
Lacking identity. So, because if you don't have an identity, or you struggle with it because of the way you were raised, astrology hands you an identity on a silver platter.
That's right.
You know what I mean? There's droves and pages of information about who you are, and there are good things and mostly good things, but occasional bad things. And the way that a good horoscope writer will write is it will apply to anybody. That's why, it seems accurate. Anyway, so, if you, crystal healing, it provides you with a path, right? If you suffer from chronic fatigue and all the doctors have let you down, and you believe that wearing a copper magnetic thing on your wrist is going to help, and it seems to kind of help, then, and there's a thing called placebo, which is a powerful, a lot of people think placebo means false, but placebo is not false. Placebo is real. Yeah. Like, when you believe something is going to work, then it increases the chance of it working, not in a fake way. You're not just convincing yourself. It literally will work. Like, we've shown this many times. If you believe, we give you a placebo, we give you a sugar pill, and we tell you this is going to cure your depression for on average, you are going to do better than people that we don't give that pill to, sugar pill to. Your depression and depression, that's a kind of a concrete thing. So you can't give someone a placebo to make them like grow another arm, for example. That's just not going to work, right? or if their finger was cut off, you can't give them a placebo. So that's a concrete thing that, cannot be overcome by mind over body. But there's a lot of things like depression, anxiety, chronic fatigue, pain that that are susceptible to your nervous system that is responsive to a placebo. Anyway.
That's right. Anything that you could do via, like, say, meditation or other ways to influence your brain to help out how you're feeling about things. Certainly, when you think when you are Dumbo and you have the magic feather, you are going to fly. Sometimes.
Right. And, the research on placebo is actually very dense, and I don't know even 1% of it. So there's a pill I could give you that would make you know like 10% of it. Yeah. Since most people believe in a supernatural belief, they've thrown their phone into...
Oh my God. No, they can't, because that is bad luck.
Well, they've hated us since the beginning of my conversation because...
Oh my gosh.
We threaten and insult everyone with this conversation. So by the time this gets posted, Omicron should...
be done.
And then we can actually meet in person again.
Go back to in person, I know.
And we can go to Disneyland together.
Oh man, I cannot wait. That's
So
cool.
do we know about the other variants? Like, isn't there another Omicron? Like, I'm worried
Stop.
that we're not going to be able to go on our trip.
Spring, sun kills everything. By the time the sun comes out, everything will be fine.
We'll just put bleach in our veins. Doesn't that clean everything?
Please no.
All right, Berto. Well, that went a lot longer than I thought it would. And we only got to like 3 emails. I have so many emails to get to.
Just shut up.
There's all these like short questions on Discord I wanted to get to.
Well, there's short questions, but there's not short answers.
Well, they would have. I think they would have had short answers.
All right. Well, next time we get
mostly because the questions are for you, and I wouldn't be answering them. So I'm the long-winded one of the bunch anyway.
Next time we'll have to hammer through them.
Yeah. All right. Well, that does it for that hammering. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.